with our next panel. So please welcome to the stage HillVets lead protege, Lindsey Schiro.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us here today. Our panel is the Veteran and Military Family Panel, Reinventing the Veteran and Family Transition, Channeling a New Sense of Service. Today with us, we have Streyder and Moos. Pleasure to have you all. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And on the screen, we have Senator Thom Tillis and Bronner. Thank you very much for joining us here today. A little background, Senator Thom Tillis is currently serving his second term in North Carolina and is a member of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, the Veteran Affairs Committee, the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, and the Judiciary Committee. Streyder is an advocate, organizer, and proud military spouse. In 2020, she founded the Secure Family Initiative, which is a non-bipartisan nonprofit that trains and mobilizes military families to be voters and advocates for their communities. She is recently named 2022's AFI's Military Spouse of the Year. Bronner is founder and chief operating officer of Veterans for Political Innovation, which is a national nonprofit community of veterans and supporters advocating for non-bipartisan election innovations. He also served on active duty for 8 years as a naval flight officer. And last but not least, Moos is a disabled veteran of the U.S. Army and is Deputy National Service Director for more than 1 million members of the Disabled American Veterans in August 2014. So thank you all for joining us here today. We really appreciate it. Senator, we know you are on a tight time schedule, so this first question will be to you. What drove you to go into public service?
Well, I don't know. I think there was always a desire to serve. Back behind me over there, you'll see when I was a patrol boy back in 5th grade, I was nominated by my teacher. I've been involved in a lot of nonprofit work before I decided to run for the legislature. And quite honestly, a key part of the reason why I wanted to run for the Senate, I did serve in the legislature and was Speaker of the House, is we're a military state, we're a veteran state. So I remember vividly after I won my election and I had a conversation with Leader McConnell about my committee choices. I said I have to be on Senate Armed Services and I must be on Veterans Affairs. And if I can't get on those committees, I don't know if I want to be on any. I'll just work on the issues off the committee. And I've gotten them. I've been on there for 7.5 years, and it's one of the most rewarding aspects of my job.
Thank you so much for sharing that, sir. Eric and Chad, as veterans, what drove you into public service after your service in the military? Eric, we will start with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I think once you catch the bug for service or a mission-oriented organization, it's hard to lose that desire. Once you experience that sense of mission and camaraderie that we had in the military, that really just informed where I wanted to get back to after a short time practicing law and real estate. So now I'm back on a new mission, but also grateful to work with great veterans from all over the country.
So I guess I just felt like, what a noble cause to be able to work for veterans. And it really was, once the opportunity presented itself to be able to work for disabled American veterans, it just seemed like a no-brainer to be able to spend your career being able to take care of what veterans had for needs. I'd already served active duty Army and I served Reserve Army as well prior to having the opportunity to get on board with disabled American veterans, and now I've been with them for 27 years. I started with them in 1995 and have just had so many different opportunities working with volunteer programs as well as our service programs. Many of our volunteer programs, we work in partnership with the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Winter Sports Clinic, the First Swing Clinic, those things to be able to take soldiers that have been injured as a result of their service, need some kind of adaptation, to be able to move on with their recreational activities, and being able to provide that and see people come out of their shell and be able to work with the type of disabilities or injuries that they sustained. It really has proven to be what I thought it would be. So I feel actually very fortunate to have been able to find DAV and be given the opportunity to spend so much time with them, working with the significant number of programs that they do have.
And Sarah, as a military spouse, what drove you into public service and why did you found the Secure Family Initiative?
So my trajectory into public service preceded becoming a military spouse. I was kind of already on that path. Grew up in the church where we did lots of volunteering and got very frustrated in a direct service providing capacity, feeling like, listen, I can give this person a lunch, but they're going to come back hungry to me the very next day. Surely there's a way that we can tackle issues like this in a more upstream capacity. Et voila, public policy. So I ended up studying that path and finding in my early career working in and out of government, and really found it attractive. I think as a military spouse, you're pretty well skilled and set up to be good at public service because under duress, you've developed the skill of navigating bureaucracy, and often have had to be really good at interacting with people from lots of different backgrounds in a pretty non-polarized or partisan way. So I think we make some pretty good public policymakers and public servants more broadly. And the goal behind Secure Families Initiative was this recognition that as military family members, we live the consequences of public policy, but specifically foreign policy, every day. But we're not often invited to those decision-making tables. And by not having our lived experiences of the impacts that war and peace have directly on us at the home front, the decisions that are being made are going to necessarily be lacking in the fullest and broadest data that could possibly happen. And so we really wanted to help train and empower military partners and family members to get more involved in civics broadly, but specifically about foreign policy.
Now, to all of you, as we look to recruit a 21st century force, what do you feel is most important in facilitating the strength of a military family?
I guess I think most importantly is to tell the stories. I mean, tell the positive stories that veterans and veterans' families experience. I mean, the skills, the abilities that it gives you for transition into a civilian position. I mean, the leadership skills that they talk about, the being on time. If you're not 5 minutes early, you're late type mentality. And that's what a lot of employers are looking for. And I think being able to tell the success stories that veterans experience as a result of their military service is probably one of the most important things. Sometimes, as we all know, the positive stories don't get out there. I mean, it's the negative stories. It's the things that the roadblocks that a veteran encounters in their process to secure benefits or gain employment or go back to school or whatever it is, gain health care. It's always those difficult stories that we tend to hear most often. But I guess the other thing that I think is very important to help recruit the next generation is ensuring that the benefits that we promise to our service members are readily available. Congressman Mass talked about some of the bureaucracy that takes place and some of the difficulties that everybody runs into. I think we just have to work better to ensure that when a veteran is seeking a benefit, that the eligibility criteria, the process in order to get to the ends that they're looking for is well laid out and a very easy process to move towards, and it's not a bureaucratic scenario where folks just kind of give up and realize that, hey, I've spent more time doing this. Why don't I just maybe transfer my efforts and my goals to something else that's going to be a little more readily attainable? So I think making any of the benefits that we as a nation provide to veterans accessible and readily available, I think is probably one of the most important things to show the next generation that if they are to serve, if they are willing to take that oath, that the benefits that they're eligible for are going to be there for them at a later date.
Absolutely. Thank you. Senator, your thoughts on the issue. How do you think we should strengthen and facilitate the well-being of a military family?
Well, we have to begin when someone enlists. We have to provide more opportunities for military spouses. The disruption of a PCS moving from state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction creates enormous challenges for military spouses. And we're working very hard to try to get state compacts to really accelerate the ability for a military spouse to be able to move themselves, their families, and then get back to their own professional development. And I think also to what Chad says, we need to do a better job, I think, of transition. A better story in transition could be a great recruiting tool. I, for one, think that this one-size-fits-all TAP process, transition assistance program, doesn't work. I'd love for us to get to an audience of one so that we understand the work experience, the life experience, the things that are indicators of where we can help a veteran or a service member transition into a veteran's post-service role. And we also have to be able to identify indicators of risk and where we may need even increased focus on veterans who may have challenges once they transition. That's a great story to tell when you're going to recruit young people. We also have to understand that we have headwinds against us. There's increased competition these days for young people. We're seeing various branches talk about having to reduce end strength, not necessarily because they're driven by strategy, but the reality of what they may have as those who are willing to serve. So we've got to get out there and I think telling veteran stories, doing a better job at the VA. I think on the whole, the VA does a good job. I was just at a Veterans Affairs Committee. We're about to consider the confirmation of a new chair of the appeals board. We should have a backlog of almost zero, except for some of the most complex appeals. We need to move heaven and earth to get the benefits that veterans deserve. Except before COVID, now we do a lot of immigration work, but before COVID, the overwhelming majority of casework that I do in my office are helping veterans navigate through the process that can be very, very difficult. And the VA and the Trump administration, continuing in the Biden administration, is beginning to simplify things, but it's still a complex process, and it shouldn't be for a veteran, particularly a veteran in a health crisis. We should do everything that we can to get them the care and the benefits that they deserve, because that also is a good news story for those who are considering service.
Senator Tillis, that was a perfect segue to my next question. And what are your thoughts, and how do you think we can better leverage the TAP program?
Well, I feel like I just had a discussion with an analytics company. I spent most of my career in private sector, and I did a lot of work on data analytics and understand predictive analytics. I think that we need to do a better job of capturing information over the life of the service member that can be instructive to their aptitudes, their opportunities after they get out. I think we have to look at fundamentals like financial literacy. It's one thing if you have a colonel transitioning out than someone who may have served only maybe 4 years. A young person that may even need assistance on financial literacy, a number of other things to set them up to be successful. You can't do that on a broad base. You have to know the service member and tune transitions to that service member's needs. Maybe you can create smaller cohorts, but I also think we have to spend time at, I tell everybody, if you go into some of these transition assistance program meetings, you've got somebody taking notes, making sure they get everything right, and you got somebody in the back that may have ear pods on, just going, I'm looking forward to getting this meeting over so I can go to the next phase of my life. And we want to present information that's relevant to the individual that sets them up to be successful. But again, I have to emphasize, if you take a look at veterans' homelessness, if you take a look at if we captured more information early and ongoing over the life of the service member, I believe that we can use predictive analytics to say, not only here's the potential for the transitioning service member, but here are some risks and what sort of programs, what sort of things can we do to make sure that we address those and set them up for success.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Eric, what are your thoughts on the TAP program, and where do you think service members are falling through in their transition?
Yeah, so my personal data is about 15 to 17 years old. That's when I went through TAP. But certainly getting veterans, and I agree with what the senator said, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. The job opportunities I was looking at after service were very unique and different than most of the other folks I was with in the TAP class. Some of the things I wish I had availed myself of earlier would have been personality testing strength finders, different coaching that I've now learned. There's all these organizations providing incredible executive coaching and personality testing and helping veterans find their next mission. That was something, it honestly took me 10 or 15 years to find my own mission after the service. So I think just the more tools we offer our veterans and the military families as well, the better results we'll get.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. And Sarah, to you, as a military spouse, when do you think service members should start thinking about their transition?
Well, we haven't gotten there yet personally, so I may not be the best expert for that question, but I appreciate your framing of the previous question about attracting a 21st century force by thinking about how to strengthen the family, because I think it's an important recognition that recruitment and retention decisions start at the kitchen table, is what we like to say. And so you may recruit, what's the saying, like you recruit the troop, but you retain the family, or something cheesy like that. Anyway, but it's true, because you need to make sure that there are economic empowerment opportunities for partners who want to be part of the workforce and have that be a thriving part of their life that they can grow in and continue. You want kids and other dependents in the family unit to make sure that they have the education, health, and mental health resources they need throughout service. So in addition to looking at the transition period and what comes after, I think focusing on the experience throughout to set folks up for success later. So if a spouse has employment opportunities where they can gain financial steadiness, that's going to make the transition easier on the tail end. Obviously, I focus a lot on civics in my work, and civics can be a really important way for especially military partners and voting age teens to feel like they have a sense of identity and voice and a participation in the decisions that are affecting their life throughout service, not just waiting until after they leave. So clearly identifying, here are the ways that you can plug into the political process that aren't going to endanger your service member's career. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't also say, as part of this holistic look at how do we set veterans and their families up for success, both during and after service, we need to make sure the operational tempo that we're requiring of our armed services is responsible, is one that is sustainable, that the force can successfully meet the needs of. And I think that's been a big missing piece in lots of conversations like that. That right there is that upstream cause that's going to make worse and harder to solve a lot of the downstream issues we see facing our community.
I love that op-tempo piece. That is a huge part of, I feel, military families and their readiness and, recruitment and everything, is how often their spouses and families are deploying. So, right. Absolutely. Now, Chad, where do you think, as a transition veteran yourself, when do you think service members should start thinking about their transition throughout their career?
So, working for disabled American veterans and having served, I always feel like there's no better time than the present. You can be in your military career one day doing just great, and something happens the following day that would medically make you ineligible to continue your service. It happens literally that quick. So, understanding and knowing what your skill sets are, what you're gaining due to your military service, and planning for a future, whether that future be 10 years or 20 years from now when you're being retired for longevity, or if it happens quickly as a result of an injury and you have to be discharged, in the coming months or maybe within the next year you're being medically retired. So I always feel like the best time to plan is always right now. And if you haven't started planning for your transition from active duty and you are on active duty, you should start looking at that right now. I know from my experience, I was discharged from active duty in '93, and our transition was a much easier process. If you would opt out, you could just do that. You didn't really have to go to your transition class, and I know that has changed quite a bit, and now it's become a requirement and mandatory for folks to be able to have to do that. So I think it has come a long way. I do agree with the fact that there are different tracks that should be taken depending on what it is you want to do. If you want to go into education or into schooling, there's a track for that. If you want to go into employment, there's a track for that. But also there are so many varying ranges of individuals in those transition courses that speaking to everybody on the same topic is pretty tough, but they're not all going to be able to take the same thing from it necessarily because they're all looking at different directions as they transition. So keeping that in mind as we do the transition, but definitely making it mandatory. I mean, I think having a service member in those courses as opposed to being able to opt out is so much better, even if they have their ear pods in the back of the room. Like I had heard earlier, sure, that can happen, but they're going to absorb something and they're going to hear things from their cohorts that are in the same course as well. I think they should make, a military spouse join with me or with the service member as well and allow those folks into those transition courses. I think if my wife was sitting next to me and I knew I was going to get grilled that evening on what I had learned and what I need to be planning for the future, I'd probably pay much more attention because I'm going to have to answer to her later on. So obviously a great idea in my mind there, but again, planning for it right now because you just don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, especially in the kind of work that I do at Disabled American Veterans. We see it time and time again where folks say they had envisions of being in the military for 20, 30 years and 5 years later or 5 years into it, it's cut short.
Absolutely, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that. Senator, I know we only have you for a few more minutes. So considering the U.S. military is civilian-led, what are your thoughts on military exceptionalism as it pertains to when service members leverage their military experience for political gain?
I think that's a tough question, or I believe it's a tough question to answer. I don't think, I think that anyone in the military should exploit their military service and their sacrifice and service to this nation in all aspects. If you think about up here, we have several members who have served, and their insights are critically important, particularly some that may have served and then gone into some other profession. That combination of experience is gold up here, and I think should be a matter of distinction if they're running for office or serving at any level of government. I think the same thing holds true for many of the men and women who come out of the armed services, that we need to make it very clear to the business community and potential employers that they're taught and they live every day. I think it was Chad who was saying, they're taught if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late. That we should make it clear to employers that these are special people. If they've served and they've served honorably, they already check a lot of boxes that others may or may not based on their prior experience. So I, for one, think that anybody that served and committed to this nation and our freedoms, protection of our freedoms, should be distinguished from a group who may have all other things equal. Then I think the tie and the priority should always go to someone who served, whether it's in public service on the stage trying to get a vote or whether it's trying to get a job once you've served.
I agree. It's also a challenging question. I think there's a tension, right? No one likes inflation, and I don't think anyone likes the inflation of heroes in our country, right? Speaking for myself, just because I signed up to serve, I absolutely do not consider myself a hero. And I do think, so that's on the one side. And then on the other side is the fact that only about 1% of our population is serving. Only about 5% of our population are veterans. So there is something very unique about the veteran community. And I think we just need to be authentic and genuine. We don't need to exaggerate our record or what we did in the service. We need to find tools to help us translate military speak into civilian speak when we're looking for jobs. And there's lots of great resources out there. But yeah, the idea that everyone who served in the military is exceptional just because they served, I think that can be taken too far, but that there's also some merit to it.
Sure, more from the, I think, civilian side than the military side. Working in foreign policy, there is this automatic cachet that anyone in uniform gets when it comes to weighing in on current events. And that's a big responsibility, I think, for that person in uniform to hold, because it can very easily obscure the best analysis, right? Because the assumption is that, you must be the chief subject matter expert, when in actuality, when you're part of, anyway, I just think I'm very wary of military exceptionalism on a big scale. I think the points that have been brought up so far as to implications for hiring or implications for a position in public service on an individual level make a lot of sense, but we need to be careful with how we within this community wield the natural authority and trust that we have responsibly, that we're not perpetuating endless cycles of protracted conflict, for example, or abusing kind of that authority given the importance of civilian oversight of our armed forces. So I think I see it from that responsibility lens on the big picture, to not undermine any of the employment statements that have been made.
So I guess to start out, I'll say, in the chance of looking like a dummy, I saw the question the other day and I said, what does that mean, And having served, I don't feel that military exceptionalism, at least in my own service. I'm a wartime veteran, but I'm not a combat veteran. So I guess I did look at service of others quite frequently and felt like, they did a lot more than I did. They contributed quite a bit more. They have combat experience and the like. I asked a few of my coworkers about military exceptionalism, and of course I made the mistake of asking a Marine, and he said, well, of course we're better than everybody else. But he didn't understand the question either, I don't think. So he writes with crayons and chews on them sometimes when he's done. So
Hey, Chad,
yes. Hold
on. I've got a Marine in the room here.
Oh, I apologize. He's got us surrounded, I hear. I had to read into it a little bit to find out exactly what people meant by military exceptionalism. And one of the things that, and Eric had brought it up as well, the percentage of Americans that have served and the percentage of Americans who are veterans is pretty low. I mean, the majority of the United States never served. Never served in combat, never served at all, period. And I started to draw some commonalities or lines in history and looked at, World War II and the fact that there was a significant effort on civilians towards the war effort. Even though they weren't serving overseas, many of the jobs that men left to go overseas to fight the war were taken over by younger people or women building in factories. Also, many of the factories closed down operations. They stopped making what they normally made in order to make food, bullets, ammunition, planes, tanks, what have you, vehicles to support the war effort. And DAV had to cancel one of its national conventions in 1942 as a result of the war effort. And I looked back a little bit to see what exactly, required that decision to be made. And it was the fact that there was a lack of fuel, transportation, hotel accommodations, and other war-related situations that built into that rationale for canceling our national convention. That's the only national convention we've ever canceled up until 2020. And that had nothing to do with the 20 plus years of conflict that the United States has been engaged in. It had to do with COVID. So sometimes I feel like the United States can come to similar ideals about something like COVID than they can about military service. And that was one of the things that, as I was reading more and more about military exceptionalism, is the fact that we're so far separated between the 2% that serve in combat, or the 5 or 7% it is that serve in the military, and the other 90+% that never serve, because they just don't understand what the service member has had to sacrifice. And looking in, current terms, the United States is just able to support everything we've got going on stateside, as well as everything we have going on overseas in the conflict, where the common civilian just doesn't have to even consider it. I mean, if you look around, most people would not even have changed their lifestyle in the last 20 years where the service member had to change what they did. And not only do they change what they did, they had to change multiple times because most of them are on more than one, more than two, more than three deployments in that 20 years as a result of their military service. So that was one of the other things that I read about with military exceptionalism. And again, I hadn't really heard the term before a couple of days ago, but I just kind of realized that present day, we just see so much more of a divide between what civilians think of military members and what military members think of civilians who don't serve. So that was just some of the things that I gained from that or gathered from looking at it.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was very fascinating. I appreciate that. So the final question I have is, how do you think we should leverage our nation's veterans to recruit and retain the next generation of service members? Senator, we'll start with you.
Well, a part of it is the kind of work that Chad is doing, the various BSOs are doing. I think they're some of the best they're the best advocates for veterans out there, and they're also the best ones to figure out how to engage and tell their stories and maybe even provide some mentoring to young men and women that are considering service. And I also think that getting them actively engaged in the recruiting process is going to be critically important because, again, we do have we've got 1% of the population that's served. We've got a decreasing, I think, emphasis on service in general, and the best people to maybe inspire young men and women, and I'm talking all the way down to high school, is to get them out there and tell their stories and their experiences. I think the other thing we have to do for the purposes of recruiting is have veterans be able to say positive things about their military housing, which can't always be said today. It's something I'm working on as the ranking member of the Personnel Subcommittee, to have veterans talk about how their spouse's career was enhanced by moving around and getting a variety of experiences within the lanes of whatever profession they've chosen. So I think identifying them, but also identifying that we've got more work to do so those stories can be consistently positive and consistently true. And that's the work that I do on the Senate Armed Services Committee.
Thank you, sir. Eric, how do you think we should leverage our nation's veterans to recruit the next generation?
Yeah, I think it's already been said, but sharing our stories of service, every story is unique. Every experience is different. I think there's a lot of misperceptions of what military service may or may not entail. And a recent experience I thought might be informative. I attended my local Chamber of Commerce meeting last week, and our local Army recruiter just joined the chamber, which I thought was brilliant. He's going to be networking with small business owners in our community and getting the word out in a different channel, in a different way. And to the fellow veterans or folks who are transitioning, one of the resources I've really found helpful are these Veterans Chamber of Commerce that most states have. I'm a member of the Midwest Veterans Chamber of Commerce. It's just a fantastic resource and a way to share our stories with the business community and let that trickle down to the family members and who might have kids that are interested and want to ask more questions.
I thought the senator did a great job of kind of distinguishing. There's recruiting into the experience, but there's also making the experience worth being recruited for. And if I can just speak to those who I know are directly in this room, all of you who are leveraging your previous or current armed services into a public policy role on the Hill, you're part of that. You're the best recruiters we have because you're actively every day making sure that public policy accurately reflects the best it can be for your lived experience and the lived experience of those who've served alongside you. So I just want to thank the HillVets cohorts that I know are here, either live stream or in person, because that to me, I am less interested in what role vets can play in a PR role. I am more interested in what substantive change you can make to make sure the military lifestyle for the next generation is worth signing up for in the first place.
Chad, to you?
And I already feel like we leverage our military veterans to recruit the next generation. I joined the military because my dad was in the military. And I think that happens quite frequently as generationally it's passed down from family member to family member to family member, and it kind of perpetuates. And, a lot of the families that do serve will continue to serve into the future. But I also think a big part of it is taking care of veterans when they're discharged. I mean, things happen. It's a dangerous job quite frequently. Not all situations are that way, but quite often we ask folks to put themselves in harm's way in order to do their jobs. And as a result, we need to make sure that we take care of those individuals when they return. And I think enhancing the benefits that veterans are eligible for, and I know the senator is able to speak on this, but it's really a no-brainer to give a benefit to a veteran. I don't think anybody in society is going to necessarily challenge you if you provide some kind of a benefit to a veteran to help enhance what they did for this country. So ensuring that we continuously look for ways to enhance what benefits they're eligible for, that's only going to further, encourage young people to seek that as a endeavor that they want to participate in or get involved with. So I guess those would be my thoughts on that, and I think we can always do a better job.
Absolutely. Thank you all for sharing your expertise on that question. We're going to turn it over to the room if anybody has any questions or anything.
Hi, thank you all so much for the helpful comments and for all that you do. My name's Josh Protas. I'm with Mazon, a Jewish Response to Hunger. Sarah, you said that these issues start at the kitchen table, and I want to focus on the kitchen table for just a second because far too many military families and veterans have trouble putting food on the table. Chad, you just said it should be a no-brainer to give a benefit to a veteran, and yet it's incredibly difficult for far too many of our military families and for our veterans to get the help they need from SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So, Senator Tillis, I want to ask you if you can be counted on, if we can get your commitment to remove a barrier that exists for the SNAP program having to do with the treatment of the basic allowance for housing. I know you're familiar with the basic needs allowance that was in last year's NDAA, but unfortunately that's not going to reach every military family in need.
Yeah, what we're trying to do there, and we had this discussion during the NDAA markup month and a half ago, a little bit over. It's how do we target benefits in a way that we're reaching the families that need it the most. And there have been some proposals that are more broad-based. And I think that if we can if we want to get support, because this is about getting support and getting something out of the Senate, let's at least start using data to identify those who are most at risk and focus on that community. And then to Chad's point, always try to do more for more people. But we do have, between homeless vets and struggling families, we have challenges that I think on a targeted basis we can be successful with. I've had this discussion with Senator Duckworth, and I do think that we need to make progress.
Thank you all for being here and speaking on important topics. So looking at your theme of reinventing the veteran and family transition and speaking to Senator Tillis's point of ensuring veterans get benefits that they truly deserve, we are potentially heading into a new era of recognition of what being a veteran looks like with comprehensive legislation such as the Honoring Our Pact Act. Can you speak to how the veteran and supportive communities can support the potential passage and implementation of this massive legislation?
Well, I'm happy to start. The PACT Act has two significant measures in it that were drafted by my office. But here's the other thing that we have to do, and I have, in full disclosure, I opposed the PACT Act on the floor, not because of the what we were trying to do, but how we're going to go about doing it. And in fact, I'm hoping to get back to ask a question in the confirmation hearing for the nominee for the appeals board. We have information from Veterans Affairs that says this is going to be a challenge. We just had a hearing last week talking about the challenges they're having with the electronic health record. And on the whole, I think they're doing a competent job, but that by itself is a large program. What we're proposing with the PACT Act is even larger. And when we do it, we have to get it right. I want to make sure the new promises we're fulfilling, the new promises we've made are fulfilled. But I'm also mindful of, if we don't get this implementation right, then what about those veterans seeking benefits now potentially having a promise broken just because of the sheer volume and the way that they're going to go about implementing it? So we're trying to work on the making sure that how we go about doing it ultimately does achieve what is trying to be achieved with the PACT Act. And Secretary McDonough stipulates that we already have. As a matter of fact, we had a hearing a couple of weeks ago with BSOs talking about, and if my mental math was right, about 1,000 positions that are unfilled. Now we're talking about thousands more positions that are going to be necessary to really fulfill the requirements under the PACT Act. And we're going to have to get to work and implement it and do it right. I do believe the underlying, like I said, a lot of the underlying language or bills that my office was responsible for drafting. I just want to make sure. I should have also said I spent 20 years in professional services at Price Waterhouse implementing large, complex, transformational change. And the PACT Act is a large, complex legislative mandate that we've got to focus on getting right. And in spite of the fact that I opposed it more along the timelines and the methodology for implementing it, now I'm going to stand behind it and do everything I can to make it be successful.
I'd like to echo everybody's thoughts and thank you all for participating on the panel and speaking with us today. My name is Lawrence Pack. I'm a Marine veteran, recently transitioned into the reserves and into the private sector. Regarding the theme of this panel, Reinventing, the veteran and family in transition, I recently experienced that and had the opportunity to go through TAP, had the opportunity to pursue a lot of other transition programs, some of which were really great and a little bit more tailored. Some of the comments that you all brought up today was the fact that it's hard to make a mandated transition program from DoD not a cookie cutter solution for everybody that everybody has to check off in 1 week. Has there been any thought about encouraging some of these other types of transition programs, for lack of a better term, like privatizing it or crowdsourcing it, so that maybe not necessarily to replace the DoD mandated TAP or TAMP or however it's called, the different services, but to perhaps augment that and to enable service members to have additional opportunities that might be more customized for their particular needs, if they're going to school, if they're going in the private sector, if they're going into public service of some other kind. So that's my question, and then my comment about when the transition process should happen. In my opinion, I think it should be something that starts upon matriculation or entry, whether it's enlisting or commissioning. A lot of those things, like Senator Tillis brought up, financial literacy is something that could be beneficial for a lot of service members when they enter. And of course, there's many other topics that could be very beneficial if some kind of training related to transition is provided in the beginning of their service entry. Thank you.
So I guess I'm not aware that there's any effort afoot to transition from doing military transitions from DoD to the private sector or crowdsourcing or the different ideas that you mentioned. I mean, I know obviously DoD likes to keep their folks close. They want to take care of them the way they want to take care of them. And whether or not there's a benefit to having a private sector take care of veterans in their transition, I'm not sure if that's any better or worse for those who are going through the process. I know there's been, a significant amount of talk about privatizing healthcare for veterans, but again, does transitioning or moving folks out of the VA healthcare system provide them any better care because you're letting them do it privately or in their own communities wherever they choose to get their health care? Obviously, VA, or in our thoughts anyways, we feel like VA is better equipped to handle the injuries and the disabilities that folks incur as a result of their military service. So I'm not positive. I can't speak towards whether there's any definite plans or efforts to transition it to a private sector type of a transition process. So I can't really speak to that for you, but maybe somebody else can. But what I would say, and as I had mentioned earlier, I think that the way the transition classes are put out there have greatly improved over time, at least from my experience when I was discharged in 1993. They have improved, but I don't know if there's other things that can improve them more so by taking them private.
I appreciate your service, and I agree that transition really needs to start the day you swear the oath. A part of that, a part of what we're looking at here is, one, how can we look at the MOSs that you may have over the course of your career? How do they map to the private sector? Are we doing a good enough job to even demonstrate early in the service members' tenure how their skills are building to a career, and then pick a pathway? And what more could we do earlier? Saying, look, if you don't plan on being here for 10 or 20 years, here are other things that you may want to do beyond your job assignments that are even going to better position you for the opportunities once you ultimately transition. And with the transition assistance program, it's a week long. Maybe there is something to be said for having that program. We can always look at the curriculum and improve it, engage people that can make it helpful. But I think that transition assistance needs to go far beyond the course that someone takes. And there you would almost invariably want to rely on VSOs and other organizations that we think are efficacious in terms of helping a productive transition occur. I mean, these are the things that we're talking about up here, both in my role in Senate Armed Services and in Veterans Affairs. The other thing that we have to do a better job of, and it must be a miss in our current transition assistance program, the vast majority of veterans who commit suicide, still an average of over 20 a day, the majority of them have no connection to the VA. So one of the things that we have to work on are no connection to a veteran service organization, no connection to the VA. How can we do a better job of making sure that service member is aware of the benefits and the resources that they have access to, and to make sure that they take advantage of that.
Thank you so much, Shiro. And I know you have to leave shortly, so I just wanted to thank you so much for your time and candor during this conversation. We greatly appreciate you joining us here today.
Well, thank you all. Sarah, congratulations on your recognition as the Spouse of the Year. Chad and Eric, thank you for your service. It was a pleasure being on the panel with you.
Thank you, Senator.
Likewise, thank you. Thank you, Senator.
I'm Nick, one of the lead protégés, and recognizing that the U.S. military is the most diverse employer in the United States with 1.3 million active duty service members, and the leading employer for transgender service members, or transgender Americans as well, who are protecting our freedoms. How can we ensure that the repeal of the trans ban is codified so that transgender service members continue to be recognized for their service, and as they transition out of the military, are receiving that much valued transitional support as they get out and receive the benefits that they are entitled to?
I don't know. So the how would be passing a law, right? That's how you would codify it. I think it touches on a really interesting broad topic of this is a federalized community in a way that I think that has a lot of implications for a lot of areas of policy, whether that is LGBTQ protections at the federal level, whether that's reproductive rights and healthcare access at the federal level, whether it's voting access rights at the federal level. I think there is this recognition that because we are a community that does not have geographic self-determination, it's important that our legislation have our back no matter what state we get stationed in, no matter what country we get stationed in, which I do think puts the onus on the federal body of legislature to take that responsibility. So I can't tell you how to do it necessarily or give some commitment to it, but I think it's a really important point to raise, and is certainly something that's a common thread through a lot of the advocacy we do at SFI, and I know a lot of MSOs and BSOs we partner with.
So as we finish up here, Chad and Eric, I just want to thank you both for your service, and Sarah, yours as well, being a military spouse and Military Spouse of the Year, and all you do for SFI. Thank you all for joining us here today. We greatly appreciate the time out of your very busy schedules and the candor and conversation. It was great to have you all with us. So thank you very much.